We put the inscrutable into a box so they may be scrutinized. I made X inscrutable. I put X into the box. I made my parents inscrutable. I put my parents into the box. I decorated the box so it seemed foreign, barbaric. I made the box inscrutable so it seemed like a distant ancestor. I buried it so it seemed like a grave. I made a chink in the box that the gaze could penetrate. I stayed outside the box. I treated what was inside the box as a joke. I was the English-speaking audience. I watched Fresh Off the Boat on the Idiot box. I watched The Throne on the Idiot box. In The Throne, a parent puts his son in the rice chest. After the son's death, the rice chest is forced open. After the son's death, his mouth is forced open. 3 spoonfuls of rice are forced into his mouth, rice that might have kept him from starving to death in the rice chest. After the son's death, a name is forced into his mouth. The name is Sado, a name which has meaning for Korean-speaking audiences. I have said Sado's name many times. The son never called himself Sado. There was never a chink in the rice chest. No one could see into the rice chest. There is a you in this poem. You are a member of the English-speaking audience. I let you see into the box, into what is private, into what is foreign, into what is inscrutable, into what has been buried. I am the chink in the box. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading that poem, Monica. And thank you so much for From, and for joining up, yes. And for honoring us with your presence today. As I was hearing you read the poem aloud again, I'm struck by its kind of, it's so hypnotic, right? And I feel locked in the box that the language itself is kind of creating, and these kinds of recursions and buildings, and as if I'm in a logic game that's not actually logic, right? Unfolding, and until it's really, a kind of entrapment within English itself. So maybe I'll throw some of those reflections out and see if there are any of those words that we can kind of latch onto. But I'm thinking how you think about your relationship to something you've spoken about at length, your relationship to more kind of analytic writing, or the relationship between logic and lyric, or lack of relationship, as it may be.
Yeah, this was probably the first and the only poem I wrote during the pandemic. And, during the pandemic, I was single momming it. And so I did not have a lot of time to write. So clearly things were building up. And so I sat down to write this, and I was writing it for 3 days. And I just started with this image, which is Sado in the rice chest. And what do I want to write about Sado in the rice chest? I don't want to put a camera in the rice chest with Sado, because so many people have done that, and he deserves his privacy and his suffering, right? I don't want to re-exoticize this figure that has been so exoticized. I don't want to be the person who is trapping him in the box again. But I did want to write about him, and I was thinking about how to write about him. I watched this film called The Throne, and it makes me think about, okay, how can I write about Sado? I start with just that image, Sado in the rice chest. What do I do with that? At what distance is he from me? What is containing him away from me? Well, what is containing him away from me is experience and his language and his history. And how do I make that present? I start with him in the rice chest, and then the box builds itself around the poem. and the box becomes the poem, and I think about where I am standing with regard to where Sado is standing, and then I think about where I'm standing with respect to the people who are reading the poem. Where are they standing? Why are they looking at Sado in the box? What do they want from him, right? What does anybody want from him? And so I was just kind of trapped in this writing of this poem. About day 2, my friend Kathy Murakami wants to have dinner, and I have to tell her, no, I can't. I have to figure out how this damn poem ends. I've got to get out of this poem. I mean, it starts to become really claustrophobic, like I'm in there with him, and how do I get out? But I didn't know that the poem would go to my parents. I didn't know it would go to my marriage. I didn't expect it to go any of those places. I just followed it.
Is that a following that you tend to allow yourself, or how difficult is it to kind of let a poem or not kind of take over in that way?
I mean, you just have to follow the poem, and I try not to have the poem itself just be a product, right? I don't want it to be another box that you can look at. And how do you get around that? Well, you say, okay, where am I going to start? I'm going to start building this thing. And then I'm just going to keep building until I see a way out of it, which is what I do, which is why the poems in this book are so damn long. You know, it's just like, just let me out of this thing.
And I was thinking about other interviews that you've given where you talk about your resistance to, and also leaning into and writing yourself into autobiography or anecdote. And I'm curious if you can expand on that a little bit for us tonight.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer. You might be able to tell that from the way I write. But I just, my impulse is just to analyze something to death. And so, but then I think about it at the level of language, which is like, okay, so here I am. I'm starting to analyze this thing. What do we have? We have Sado in the box. And so we have this piece of material, and then how do we build off of that material? How do we just keep building this thing plank by plank? And I think of a lot of my longer poems as being this staircase that I'm building step by step, and I don't know where the staircase is going. And I know that at some point the staircase is probably going to start doubling back on itself and resonating, and that's where the whole thing really becomes interesting to me. It starts to tear itself apart.
And would you say that is that's different for you than the kind of legal analytic thinking that happens in a strictly legal sense? I mean, I would guess so.
Yeah, I mean, in law, you're always trying to create a product, but it was a real breakthrough moment for me. In my last book, when I was trying to write something very difficult, and it wasn't coming naturally to me, and I was like, okay, let's try this being really hip. Okay, now let's try this being really sexy. Now let's try this being really lyric. And like none of that was letting it out for me. And I was like, okay, who would I have to let myself be? Well, I just have to let myself be this person who's going to analyze this thing to death, right? And that's where I'm going to start. I mean, literally that poem started with an analysis of the direct versus indirect articles in Milton's Sonnet 19, which was the only way I could get into the subject matter. Like, it's just like, okay, that opens it up. And then I'm just going to start following that, right? So.
Maybe we can backtrack for a second and take more of a bird's eye view look at the book and its origin. And one of the ways I like to think about it, I don't know if this word will resonate with you at all, but often my writing is, I'm pitched into a kind of crisis, or I reach an impasse of some kind where I've written myself into a box that I'm trying to, find a way out of. And were there a series of those for you that you can kind of point to around the origin of this book?
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of those for me. Like, as you know, we are coming through a period of very intense hate, and we have all learned a lot about hate in the last few years. And so I was thinking about this hate and this conversation that was happening around hate, and I wanted to be part of that conversation and to say, okay, well, how do I write about that being who I am? I mean, being this quite privileged East Asian woman, not an immigrant, and just looking at all of these things happening around me and trying to figure out a way to give voice to that on behalf of myself and on behalf of my community. And one thing I really wanted to do was to say, look, I'm not like everyone's idea of the authentic Korean person. I can't cook Korean, I can't speak Korean, and I need to articulate a space that I thought of as deracination, which is separate from authenticity. I'm not an authentic person. No one can make me be an authentic person. I'm not going to perform that. So how do I make that space of privacy for myself and for other people? Was, I think, kind of what I was thinking about.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would love to hear more too about deracination, and how you came to that word and what it means as a poetics for you.
Yeah, as a poetics, it means there is an empty space in me where the connection to the homeland should be. I grew up in Houston, Texas. We never went back to Korea. I didn't know very much about Korea, but I was always one of the only Asian kids, and so the walls of the box were the interface with whiteness, like all of these people telling me what they thought that I, as an Asian person, was supposed to be like, and imposing their stereotypes of Asianness on me. And I was thinking, okay, well, that's interesting. How do those echoes shape the space that I call an identity? And how can I bring that process to life? And if I divest myself of that, then what is left that I can call me?
Yeah, I mean, there's something so full and striking about the various tones and registers that your work reaches. I mean, throughout your books, and from in particular, I'm thinking about, I mean, some of the tones that come to mind most immediately for me are a little bit more scornful, seething, rage, but a kind of contained rage behind like gritted teeth, maybe, or plastered with a smile. And I can see that coming out of that sense of, an empty that can't necessarily be filled or has been force filled in certain ways, and wanting to kind of push that away. And I'm wondering about the use of tone for you as a kind of anchoring point or a tuning fork, and how you follow that in your work.
Yeah, tone is always the first thing for me. Like, if I don't have the tone, then I can't start writing. Tone is what pushes the poem open, and I always think of any formal decisions that I'm making in the poem are going to be a consequence of the tone. The tone is going to dictate that. And so what are these various tones that I can inhabit? There's a long sequence in the book called deracinations, where I took the word deracinations and I broke it into its component sonic parts. And, deracinations is filled with these very soft, ubiquitous sounds. And so what does it mean to be inhabiting this space that is filled with these sounds that are always around you, so that you don't recognize them, and then to be making a self out of those sounds? What does that tone look like? And so I'm building this kind of third person character, like, that people are taking as autobiography, and it's not actually autobiographical, but like I'm taking those and making them into stories about, like, who is this person who inhabits this sonic landscape? So that's one of the things I was doing. One of the things I was doing is there's a very long lyric essay in the book called In the Passive Voice, which sort of deals with the roots of anti-Asian hate. And I was writing that as a residency, because I'm always in a residency. I was in a very red area, and trying to write about that and about the interface between Asianness and Blackness, and the way in which, in some ways, historically, anti-Blackness has been constitutive of Asian American identity. Like, we were brought here to keep other people down. They are still using our bodies to beat down other people. I mean, look at the damn affirmative action case. This is always what is happening. And how do you write about an identity out of that? So I'm there, I'm thinking about these things. About day 7 of this writing process, the Atlanta shootings happen. Things go kind of haywire. And I'm just trying to write my way out of that. I'm trying to write my way around and out of it.
Mm.
And I'm thinking about tone, and I'm thinking about the way, as a writer of color, you're never allowed to be as direct with your rage as you want to be, and that sometimes you're just filled with rage and sorrow, and you don't know where to put it, and how to make a shape that will give some form to that.
Mm. Yeah. Make a shape that will give some form to that. I mean, that just makes me wonder if it should have form, right? Or if it is like, unnecessarily obliterative force.
I mean, that essay is 44 pages long because I needed to give myself some room, you know, and people kept being like, can we publish an excerpt? I'm like, no, you have to publish the whole thing or I'm not giving it to you. Because I need some room to work all of this stuff out.
I hear you on wanting to write your way out, and that sense of, you know, or coming up against the limits of what the writing is or can do, and where one goes after that with the rage and the sorrow, and so I'm going to ask that difficult question of what else?
What do you do? I mean, a lot of this book came out of these conversations that I was having at the time. I belonged to this curatorial collective called the Racial Imaginary Institute with Claudia Rankin and, you know, Kathy Parkong and some other folks, and we're just kind of talking about these things. And so the epigraph to the book is there a direction home that doesn't point backward, which was given to me, it's a quote from Paul Chan. It was given to me by a curator in the Racial Imaginary called Simon Wu. And so we're all talking through these things and talking through the components of these things and trying to figure out strategies for solidarity and for constructing a sense of the we, of belonging, of togetherness at this moment of what you could call national self-reckoning. Right?
It's so, the we of belonging, and that word solidarity, which feels so particularly charged and verging on naive or passé at this point. It feels like I don't know, I don't know if you share this sense or not, but that there's been a forced kind of distancing from it. And I'm curious, there are certain church moments in the book as well around solidarity, and curious how you talk about that word for yourself.
Yeah, there are always this hand trying to force us apart, and you look at the hand and you think, okay, where's this hand coming from? Is it capitalism? Is it what is it? There's this interesting moment in the book. You know, I'm walking past this restaurant which is by my house, and there are about 50 people there sitting at outdoor tables. It's Tacombe, which is outside the Center for Fiction where I used to work every day. And so this dude comes up to me. He's like, you know, hipster dude. And he starts going, choo, choo, choo. It's about a week after the Atlanta shootings. All the bullies were out in force, and so no one was doing anything, and I kept yelling like, hey, we don't want this racist bullshit here, and, you know, just hoping that someone would be like, you know, leave her alone, stop it. No one did, and so at some point, and this is in my neighborhood, and at some point this dude comes up, this black guy on a bike, and he's one of these very buff guys wearing like very expensive like cycling equipment, and so I stand next to him and I was like, we don't want this racist bullshit in our neighborhood, right? You know, and he's like, yeah, right, you know, God bless him. And so eventually he gives me the strength to walk away, but you know, I was thinking back on that moment later, and I wish I had put this in the book, because it was such a strange thing to ask that guy. Like, I didn't say, will you please help me? Because of course he would. But instead I make a specifically racialized plea to him as a black man to include me in his we, right? To include me in his sense of belonging which had been so injured by not being helped in that moment, and to make like a positive assertion of solidarity, which was extraordinary. I mean, I didn't even know this guy. I didn't know that he lived in the neighborhood, but I wanted him to say to me, like, you belong here. You know, we take care of each other. And so I feel like the book is kind of filled with these tensions, and life is filled with these tensions. And you know, I wanted to have that plea, you know, be in the book.
Mm. And there's a real kind of courage in that directness and naming of all the tensions and complexities. And I'm curious too, around this noun of we, the various kinds of friendly we's or writerly we's that have enabled your writing and your thinking, and how that's impacted your work.
Yeah, I mean, our curatorial work for the Racial Imaginary, our project was called The Fragility and Possibility of We. How do we construct something that goes beyond the self-interest of a particular group? How do we look past that and build something a little more durable? And so to think about, for example, Asianness in relation to Blackness. I mean, you're used to thinking about it, and they will teach you to think about it as if they're two bars on a bar graph that are next to each other, and you know the level will change, and it becomes the oppression Olympics, like whose level is higher, you know, in a way that's totally unhelpful. And instead, like, you need to think about the way these two things are structurally implicated. Like, it needs to be taught that way. We need to understand the history of that way, because otherwise the vector analysis is all wrong. Like, our efforts are pushing in the wrong direction, and we will never be able to build anything out of it, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was one conversation I really desperately wanted the book to be opening up.
Mm. Yeah. I'm thinking about conversation. I'm thinking about my own personal frustrations around it, right? And it's kind of then what, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And then what?
Yeah. What other models, historical models, have there been, and might we look toward for various constructions of we, and the idea of just Asian Americanness as one of them, right? And so I don't know if there's anything you would like to share too about your relationship to that term.
Yeah, no, I remember, like, you know, after the Atlanta shootings, one of my friends calls me. She was my college roommate, and she's Black. She was running for governor of Massachusetts, and we were talking about, like, she had been my roommate during the time of the LA uprising, and we were in the same apartment, just not able to talk to each other. It was so painful. She was from Southern California, I was from Texas, and we were just unable to speak about it. And so, you know, and I was thinking about all the times I had not called her after various atrocities, and we were trying to say, like, what is it that we can do? What is it that we can propose? What talks need to happen? What work needs to be done? And just thinking in this kind of helplessness about, like, how much work there is to be done, how little of it has been done, how little progress has been made in that direction, and how the sort of models of understanding are all built on commonality rather than difference. And how we get past that. Okay.
Q&A. Excellent sign. Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone, but we would love to hear questions from the audience. Is there any out there?
Bring it on.
I have a question.
Yes.
So when you're watching The Throne, like, what was evoked in you that you wanted to write about?
Yeah. And Prince Sato is one of these figures who historians just tussle over, right? Is he a villain? Is he a hero? How do you show him? There have been a lot of films done about him. And, you know, this film kind of portrays him as a rebel and a hero. And I was like, no, I'm not too sure about that. I don't know if I want to do that. But what I want to do, I do want to write about him. And I want to let him out. And I want to give him some privacy, right? I want him to have his suffering to himself. I want him to have his family to himself. And so that was kind of what I was thinking about when I was trying to write about this figure.
And I can't help but wonder, like, the plight of you're an Asian American and the minority situation and us wanting to get out. And how do you feel like after you finish the poem?
Yeah. Because, you know, you don't want to be the person in the box. You don't want to be the person outside of the box, and you especially do not want to be the tour guide who is pointing to the people in the box, right? And this is, you know, what Guesson calls the right of opacity, right? The right to be opaque, the right to have your privacy in that moment, right? So that's what I wanted to give him.
What does it say about me that I want to be the tour guide?
I mean, you can literally go to the palace and get into the rice chest and snap a selfie and post it on Instagram. So yeah, I haven't done that. Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk about more like the poetics of difference that you were exploring, and how like the relationship of that poetics of difference is kind of present in From, and potentially I was listening to the Between the Covers podcast, and sometimes I was wondering about the like poetics of difference as almost a communal experience for those who are not belonging in many places. Yet by unbelonging, they're not like seeing each other at all.
Yeah.
So I was interested to hear more about that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That question is about the poetics of difference. And, you know, I was teaching Teresa Hakyung Cha's dictée, and Teresa Hakyung Cha is a figure who is asserting a poetics that is not based on sameness. She is Korean, but she is not saying, I'm not the same as Korea in all its Confucian, capitalist, militaristic excess. I am an exile. I am an immigrant, and I'm a woman, and I am asserting those differences and making that a space. And that's when I think of the poetics of difference, right? You are asserting difference rather than sameness as the basis of your poetics, and thinking about, you know, identity means to be the same, right? Identical. How to get past that vision, but still have a sense of community and solidarity, right? Still to be able to say, like, look, this is a space that we inhabit together. Other questions? Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about process? I think you talked about how, like, when you're writing the poem, you like write yourself in a situation where you like, can't get dinner with your friend and you have to write yourself out of it. But I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I like to start with the first line, and then, you know, I really do think of it as building. Like, okay, I've laid down a plank. Sometimes you stiffen the plank a little bit with language or with rhetoric, and you say, okay, this is a stiff plank. I think I can build on this. I have made it an assertion. Where can I go from here? Okay, well, what is on this plank? Well, this plank has Asianness on it. Okay, let's build off of that. Oh, okay, well, this plank has race on it. Okay, let's build off of that. All right, well, what does that do? Well, that means the poem has just changed. Let's maybe comment on that, and then we can keep it going. And that's how I write my poems. I just kind of go step by step like that. And it's kind of an interesting way to proceed. I recommend it. It's sort of fun, but it does take a while.
When do you know that you're done, though? Or done? When are you done, then?
You're done when you just can't do this anymore. You're just like, just get me out
out of here. I remember I was working on the first poem of the book, which is also really long, and I was at McDowell, and race comes into the poem on, the first page, and, sort of like Chekhov's gun. All right, I put race in the poem. How's race going to get out of the poem? And so I'm writing and writing and writing, and race is not coming back into the poem. I'm like, how do I get race back into the poem? And so I'm with Andy at McDowell, and I go and I swim across Willard Pond and back, and about halfway back, I think, oh, it's a container. Race is a container. I just figured this out, and let's go. Right? Yeah. So that's how I do that. All right. Other questions? People are looking at me.
Oh, I have one.
Yes.
When you were talking to your college roommate, I know we talk a lot about how I think the white gaze kind of wants us to be like, oh, everyone who's non-white is the same.
Yeah.
But among us, there's so many different experiences, different cultures, races, and all that stuff. Like, what are some things that we can take away today to sort of celebrate the difference between races and different groups of people?
Yeah.
But then also kind of embrace the solidarity of it.
I mean, I think that's, I think that is what you have to do. You have to have solidarity through difference. You have to have encounters with difference. And you have to learn about other experiences. You have to, I don't know, I don't have very many answers for that, but I do know that we need to keep looking, and keep experiencing. Other questions? Yes.
I was struck by your mentioning of the LA riot, and you had a roommate or friend who was African American, and you mentioned that you were from Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Did the fact that you're from Texas play any role in you two not being able to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that, I'm from Houston, and I did not grow up in an Asian American community, and she's from LA, and it's there's a section in the book about Latasha Harlins, who is this 15-year-old girl. She goes into a Korean grocery store in LA. She wants to buy some orange juice for her grandmother. She's an honor student. She has $2. And she is accused and attacked by the store owner. They get in an argument, and on her way out of the store, the shop owner, Dusunja, shoots her in the back of the head, killing her. She has those $2 in her hand when she dies, and the shopkeeper's name is Dusunja. My mother's best friend's name is Sunja. The judge in the case, who's a white woman named Joyce Carlin, says at the sentencing, did Mrs. Du overreact? Yes. But was her reaction understandable? I think so. She gives her 400 hours of community service and a $500 fine. And that's on the eve of the LA uprising. And so I write about that, and I write about not being able to write about that. I was trying to write a poem for Latasha Harlins, and I was just completely unable to do it. But I was thinking a lot about the fear of Dusunja, how she was feeding that fear, how she was nurturing it, how she wanted that fear to have an object, and she was searching for an object for that fear. And that was something that I felt like I could write about. Like, I felt like I could write about what it means to be afraid and what it is to have that distorted fear interfering with your relationship with your community, and with the people around you, and how to resist that pressure to be afraid. So that was, what I wanted to take out of that story. And I think, and that's kind of a lot of what I was thinking about in the section of the book that's about anti-Asian hate. Like, how to let this not, distort you, change you into a terrible person. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
So this is kind of similar to like how do you finish a poem or how do you know it's done, but like do you ever feel like there's a difference between feeling that a poem is finished and finding your way out of a poem?
No, I never feel that. I always feel as if someone has dropped a rat into the middle of the maze that is my brain and it's just scratching and scratching and trying to get out. Do you feel like this? Yeah, and you're just like, I just got to get this thing out of my head. I don't know how. And it needs to find a path out, and I'm going to trace that path. Yeah, that's kind of how I write. I don't know, other questions? Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk about your relationship to form with the poetry. I noticed, like in Black Acre, there's more like form variation, I guess.
Yeah.
And I was thinking also in here the study of two figures, Orpheus and Eurydice, and I was curious to hear how form works.
Yeah, you know, the form is the body of the poem, and you first you hear the poem, and then you understand the shape of its body, and that's the way the poem gets to express itself. I mean, to have a life in the world is to give it this body, and so that's just what I try to do. And the bodies look very different from each other. It's just the way I write. Yes.
I have a question from our online audience.
Yes.
Who asks, can deracinated folks ever find belonging?
You know, I sure hope so. And I think you find it with other deracinated folks, hopefully, from whatever background. I mean, I am going back to Korea this summer in company with a Korean American friend, and we're going to explore and look at things and mostly eat things, and try on some makeup, and yeah. So yeah, I think so. I mean, you can find community and you can find family, and you know, I think that's what this city in some ways is all about. And any other questions?
Along that line, like when you said, you know, when the Asianness by your community was imposed upon you growing up, and when you strip those away, you're left with a little bit more of like yourself.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you've discovered through your writing?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of my writing is this process of divesting myself of various notions of desire that have been imposed upon me and things that I have been told that I want or that I should want. And then thinking about like, okay, well, if I don't want those things anymore, if I've learned to do without those things, or I've learned that those things are toxic and horrible, then who am I? Then what is it that I want in this big sucking void that is me? And, you know, I have my son. I'm very fond of him. I may buy him some books. And, you know, I have my friends and my community and the choices that I make. And I want other people to have that freedom.
Beautiful note.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, can I take a picture of you again? Yeah. You. Just smile. Yay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Can we give one more hand to Monica Youn? Thank you. thank you both for being here and for sharing your time and talent. We appreciate it. Congratulations on this new book. Thank you all for joining us here and also online. We appreciate you all. Monica will be at where these flowers are at the back desk for where the wine is for our signing line. Our books are available for purchase at the front. You can get them there and bring them back here. I do not have a register back here, but we have plenty at the front. Please make yourselves comfortable. Your assignment is to finish that started bottle of wine, so that is homework for everybody. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.